Let's welcome Dr. Jon Lundgren, Director and Founder, Blue Dasher Farm, Ecdysis Foundation, St. Esteline, South Dakota.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jonathan Lundgren. I work at Ecdysis Foundation and I run Blue Dasher Farm. We're going to talk a little bit about science today and regenerative food production, sort of the answer to pesticides, I think. Farmers are all over the country, all over the planet at this point, are kind of rethinking how they produce food. And what really got my attention from these folks is I was typically going in front of a bunch of farming groups and I'd give talks about how we don't necessarily need to be using so many pesticides, and it would be nobody was interested. This was before regenerative agriculture was really a thing. And then I started to meet these farmers and they were doing things that were crazy. They were growing traditional crops and livestock, but they weren't worried about insect pests at all, in fact, weeds a little bit. And what they were doing, I thought couldn't be done. And we started to look into it a little bit further and found that, in fact, what these guys and gals are doing is completely unique, and it's very real, and it's a very practical solution that everybody wins. So something that we ended up going all in on. What is this thing called regenerative agriculture? You see a lot of different definitions out there. This is one I like, and this is the one that we use here at Ecdysis. You're increasing soil health, increasing life on your farm, while growing nutritious food profitably. You can start adding in water, you can start adding in soil carbon, invasive species, reducing pollution, fighting climate change. All of those things are elements of this definition, increasing farm resilience and the resilience of our rural communities. So it's also a really important one. But at the end of the day, I think this really captures it well. So a few years ago, I followed the bees, and most of the nation's bees go out to California to pollinate almonds. And so I live up in South Dakota. That's where most of the nation's bees spend their summers. And I figured out very quickly anything that I'm doing up in South Dakota to help save the bees is completely negated when they come out here. And this is what it looks like. It's crops that are grown. They've desertified the Central Valley of California, which used to be wetlands. It is now a desert, and they maintain it on chemotherapy. They use pesticides and fertilizers and water, and just pump it in, trying to keep things going. When I said we need to study regenerative ag and soil health out here, the industry said soil health won't work here. And so we decided, okay, well, we're not easily daunted, and so we started a project. Tommy Fenster did, in fact. The work is now in review with Sustainable Food Systems. And we just did a very simple experimental design. Find regenerative organic almond production and compare it to their conventional neighbors. Okay, can this work? What is regenerative? Well, this is not photoshopped. This is a conventional orchard right next to a regenerative orchard. The regenerative orchard does not use tillage. They do not use pesticides. They don't have to be organic, but many of them are. They maintain perennial ground cover, and they do things like adding compost teas. And then some of these folks are going so far as to integrate livestock into that system. And you see the alternative over there for the conventional. These are the results. In these side-by-side comparisons, we did 16 orchards and some, and we have another 30 orchards that we added to this study this year. Soil carbon is 30% higher. That goes down for the first 30 centimeters or so. Soil health significantly increased in the regenerative orchards. Water. This one will change California agriculture. Every almond requires 2 gallons of water to produce. Water infiltrated the soil 6 to 22 times faster in the regenerative almond production. That's going to change everything, because right now water is the currency for production of crops in the Central Valley. Life on these farms was through the roof in the regenerative farms. We found 6-fold more biomass of invertebrates. However, pests were exactly the same. And when we showed this graph to one of our producers, the conventional producers, he looked at the data and he said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I did everything that I was told from the universities, from the USDA, from the almond board. I followed best management practices, and I sprayed insecticides 5 times last year. It was thousands and thousands of dollars I spent. And what you're telling me right now is the guy right across the road didn't spray at all, and he had the same number of pests that I did." And I don't believe that. But that's the power of science. He changed 160 acres of his orchard systems over to regenerative this year. And now we're studying that transition. So this is why we need science so desperately right now. Yields were exactly the same in these 2 treatments. Profits in the regenerative were twice as high. And it's with this data that we're motivating some of the largest almond producers in California to completely change their operations. Why isn't regenerative agriculture mainstream? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. Change is hard, isn't it? But I also think that science is to blame. And the way that we do our science right now is very much devoted to solving symptoms rather than investigating underlying problems. So that's why we decided to rethink how we conduct agricultural science. And Blue Dasher Farm is where we're doing that in eastern South Dakota here. This is our headquarters. We're going to be opening up additional hubs across the country. Like I said, we need to be focused on the underlying problems. Pesticides are not the problem. They are a symptom. Until you solve the problems, you're not going to get anywhere on the pesticide question. We also need to rethink how scientists are motivated. How do we judge the success of these people? As a scientist, I am judged whether or not I am worthy by how many peer-reviewed papers I published, how many millions in grants I sequestered, graduate students, how many of those I pumped through the puppy mill, how many committees I served on. I was good at all of these things. All right, I was really good. I was one of the best in the country. The president gave me an award in the White House. But I looked at this list one day and I said, how many of these things do farmers care about? None of them. We've become completely disconnected from the people that we're trying to serve. The scientist, and the only way you get a job is by adhering to this system. And so as a result, science is in this self-perpetuating rut that we just can't seem to break out of. And so that's why I quit. And we now assess our success based on how well we've integrated science back into food communities again. How many acres we've changed. How many relationships we've built with the people that we're trying to help. And peer-reviewed science is certainly a part of that, and I think it's an important part, but it's not number one anymore. So we decided to try to tackle this question of what is a regenerative farm? Well, there's a lot of people hand-waving right now. Oh gosh, we've got regenerative. We know what regenerative is, and if you fill out this 52-page survey of all of these questions about your operations, we will designate you as regenerative. But nobody's actually tested any of these things. And no farmer in their right mind would try to go through one of these questionnaires. I mean, it's ridiculous. Somebody behind a desk somewhere decided they were going to try to define what regenerative was. And it's not practical and it's not usable. And there's more and more of these systems coming out every year. So we decided we've got about $1 million worth of research sitting on our computers, and we actually had to develop a system for comparing regenerative and conventional rangelands and conventional and regenerative croplands in order to conduct research out there. Why don't we test our system? What a concept, huh? Why don't we put a little data behind this? So for us, it was really important that these systems were very simple, okay? Very transparent. We got it down to about 8 or 9 questions for cropland, and we got it down to about 4 questions for rangelands. And we decided, okay, it's a yes or no question, right? You can actually address this to any farmer in about 3 minutes and have your idea of whether or not this farm is actually regenerative, okay? Tillage, do you till or no? Do you use agrochemicals? Yes or no? Cover crops, are you using those? Yes, okay, that's good. How are you managing your field margins? Are you integrating livestock? And with rangelands, it all comes down to abandoning pesticide use and agrochemical use, keeping your cattle tight or your livestock in a tight pack, moving them frequently, and allowing that pasture to rest afterwards. You do those 4 things, and it seems to be very predictive of how well you're going to respond. Okay, so our scoring system had to be simple, transparent, transferable. It had to work in all kinds of different environments. It had to be scalable, so any size operation can use it. Incorruptible, that's important. We do not want industrialized regenerative. Okay? And it has to be replicable, right? It always has to work. The more regenerative practices you use, the more soil carbon you sequester. The healthier your soils. The more plant biomass you're increasing on your rangelands and in your croplands. How many critters are out there? How much life are you conserving? Scales directly with how many practices in our scoring system. How much money you make. That also scores directly with how many regenerative practices you're running. But one interesting aspect of what we saw, and this is true of almost every one of these graphs, I don't know if you caught it, but there's 2 clouds of data. There's one down towards the left and there's one up towards the right. Farms don't survive for very long in the middle. You don't get to just dip your toe in. You either have to adopt a regenerative system or you have to go back to being conventional. And the more practices that you end up adopting within these regenerative systems, the more of these positive outcomes that you end up seeing. So it's a really exciting opportunity for us to try to understand these regenerative systems, and we're currently trying to optimize this even further. Is this the end all be all? No, but it's really the first time that we've ever tried to put data behind the definition of regenerative. And I think it can help us guide our discussion so we don't get a lot of cheaters moving in. Because there was one group that said, well, we tried your scoring system and we're trying to get 80 million acres into regenerative this year. I don't know, none of our regenerative cropland ended up scoring very high. I'm like, well, if you set the bar low enough, most of the US ag is already regenerative, for crying out loud. So it is important for us to have some sort of an idea of what it is that we're talking about. We can make regenerative agriculture conducive to life again. Honestly, we don't have a choice in the matter. I often get, after giving these presentations to farmers, especially conventional farmers, what's it going to cost me to change? I love these ideas. What's it going to cost? Wrong question. What's it going to cost you not to change? It's going to cost you your farm. This is the future, folks. It's going to cost you your grandkids. Is that worth it? I hope not. We wouldn't be here without a tremendous group of young, enthusiastic scientists, and as well as your support. We cannot run this kind of research without you, okay? Please consider donating to us. Ecdysis Foundation means shedding the old skin. It's a geeky entomology term for metamorphosis, and blue dashers are a cool, environmentally very poignant dragonfly species that we love. And so that's, you can follow us on social media if you'd like. All of our science is there and available. So thank you guys very much.
Let's welcome Joanne